Okay, hello everyone, and oh, no, was that okay? Good to go. Is that better? Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Hi, welcome to this afternoon's panel on editorial innovation. I'm Rose Harris-Birtill. I'm the editorial director here at the Open Library of Humanities, and this afternoon we're going to be hearing 3 talks looking at the importance of innovative editorial work from different perspectives. So to begin today's session, we'll start with an overview of the Open Library of Humanities and its editorial practices, learning more about the work going on behind the scenes to support our suite of 28 open access journals and our flagship journal, OLH. We'll also share some useful resources to help editors improve their own best practices and policies. Now, no prior knowledge is assumed for this talk, so whether you're here today from an editorial or a primarily technical, not editorial background, we're really glad that you're with us in either way, and we hope to offer some useful insights into what we do. So we'll then hear from our panelists on their own innovative approaches to editorial practices, discussing the practice of open peer review across different journals and disciplines in order to share and learn from our experiences before opening up from discussion across the panel at the end. Okay, so let's have a look inside the OLH then, our journals and numbers. Well, since its launch, the OLH has established a platform of 28 peer-reviewed journals, and combined we publish roughly 500 scholarly articles per year. And I'm very proud to say that our articles have received nearly 2 million downloads to date. Our journals span the humanities, and to pick just a few highlights, these cover subjects as diverse as literature, architecture, history, ethnology, archaeology, linguistics, comics, films, poetry, theatre, and more. Now, Glossa, a journal of general linguistics, which has been mentioned already, is our largest journal, and this publishes an average of 2 to 3 articles per week. And previously known as Lingua, this journal made the national press for flipping to open access in 2015, when the entire editorial board simultaneously resigned from its paid publisher, Elsevier, in order to join OLH, and we're very proud to have its editorial team on board. Now, in 2022, our journal sites were viewed over 2.5 million times, which was an increase of over 144% on 2021, the year before. Now, in 2022, we also saw nearly a 300% increase in the number of article downloads compared to the year before, which is a significant rise in the number of people viewing research online. So from this perspective, access to open access is certainly growing, and our open access articles are being read more widely than ever before. Now, developing Janeway as our own open source publishing software has been a really important milestone, as having our own not-for-profit platform has enabled us to publish our own journals in-house. Now, all of our journals are proudly run on Janeway, and being part of the Janeway ecosystem means that every time our authors and editors give feedback on the system, the improvements in turn benefit all of Janeway's wider user base, which gives benefits for the entire scholarly community. Now, to move to our flagship journal, the OLH journal is dedicated to publishing open access special collections. Now, special collections are curated special editions led by experts from across the humanities, and they've proven particularly popular for scholars looking for an open access home for an edited collection on a particular topic. Now, we now have 45 special collections, which include topics from machine vision, the latest article of which has just been published, to medieval minds and matter. And guest editors have complete oversight over the collections, and all articles are professionally copy edited and typeset, and they're published on a rolling basis as soon as they're ready. Now, as a journal editor, a really handy feature when using Janeway is its reporting plugin, and this shows useful statistics about the journal at a glance. Now, in 2022, our submission to publication time across the journal was 350 days, so about 11 months from start to finish on average. And once accepted, papers were published in an average time of 3 months. Now, using this plugin, we can also see that the OLH journal's most downloaded article of all time on Janeway is Classical Music Goes Viral, Meanings and Meanings of Classical Music in the Wake of Coronavirus. And this has actually been downloaded over 40,000 times since it was published during the global pandemic in 2021. Now, the reporting tool can also show readership by geographical location. So for the OLH journal, we have quite an international readership. It's spread across the globe, with the 3 largest readerships for the journal by geography as the US, China, and UK. And I've actually put the top 10 up on the slide. Now, when thinking about a journal's readership and reach, it's also worth bearing in mind that as editors, we are the gatekeepers to knowledge in some ways, and we have positions of great privilege and responsibility to ensure that knowledge is being made available to all as far as we can, regardless of ability, background, and circumstance. Now, it's also particularly important to give back to the editorial community in as many ways as we can, in keeping with the spirit of our mission to extend open access to scholarship in the humanities for free for everyone forever. So to this end, I'd like to raise awareness of some useful resources that we also provide to help other editorial teams from the wider academic community. Now, at OLH, we're aware of how financially stretched editorial teams can be working in open access. And so in 2020, we launched our OLH Open Access Award as an innovative way to support fledgling open access projects across the globe. Our first 2 awards went to the National Library of Kosovo and the US-based Open Access Digital Theological Library to help further projects in making knowledge more freely accessible. We've just awarded this year's OLH Awards to 3 more really interesting international open access projects. And we've also funded editorial teams looking to further their works in open access. So it's worth mentioning here. Now, announcements about future funding rounds will be made on our social media channels, so do follow us online for news of future awards. Now, at OLH, we're fortunate enough to have the funds to be able to pay for professional article designs for our typesetters to use, but we're also aware that this is a luxury that many small editorial teams simply just don't have the budget for. So as such, we've made our article design that we use to create our typeset PDFs open source, and we've made this available to anyone who wants to use it. It can be freely downloaded from our GitHub page, and we're proud to use the same templates across our journals. At our flagship journal, OLH, we've also set up detailed author guidelines for submissions and robust publisher policies that adhere to the latest standards in editorial best practice, which our other journals are free to use as a resource to help strengthen their own editorial practices in turn. We've also put together OLH advocacy resources for people to refer to if they want to know more about open access. Now, this is useful for editors writing proposals to get more resources, or if you want more staff time allocated for your journal and need some facts to help make that happen, as well as those looking for extra materials to help speak or teach about open access. Now, there's loads of useful information here. I've included the links up on the slide, including multilingual glossaries of key terms in open access. We've got posters, infographics explaining how open access works, and interviews with key individuals and organisations working in open access. So I'd now like to introduce Dr. Simon Everett, our editorial officer, who's going to highlight some of the improvements and updates we've been making over the last year or so to improve best practice. Thank you. Over to you, Simon.
Hi everyone, hello, nice to see you all. Thank you, Rose, as well. So in this talk, we've invited you to peek under the metaphorical bonnet of the Open Library of Humanities, and Rose has very kindly presented a thorough overview of our growing reach and ambitions as a publisher. The smooth running of our organisation relies on both the expanding vision of the OLH and on the well-oiled operation of our editorial team. From onboarding new journal editors to overseeing articles through the Open Library of Humanities journal, editorial at OLH is always ticking over, keeping one eye on the evolving open access landscape and the other on developing our own procedures and policies, making them clear to follow, transparent, and in line with the latest best practice in scholarly open access publishing. I want to take you through some of these granular developments that the OLH editorial team has been working on over the last 2 years that are perhaps not so obvious, and some changes that have been extremely helpful in our day-to-day editorial activities. So one of the sweeping changes that editorial has undertaken at OLH, for example, has been to document many of our pre-existing processes, often carried out by members of the editorial team, but not always apparent to those accessing our journal or press websites, into transparent, actionable policies that are openly accessible to all. Where small sections of important publisher-level policies, such as our publication ethics and malpractice statement, were once hosted at journal level, we've worked hard to draw these broad-based policies that affect all of our journals into one place on our main OLH website, where it makes far more sense for publisher policies to be found. Alongside this, we have restructured and expanded our publisher-level policies. For our publication ethics policies in particular, we now have clearly outlined the responsibilities of everyone involved in the publication of scholarly research, their expected conduct, duties, and adherence to the highest standards of research integrity. We now have clear processes in place and effectively deal with the potential instances of publication malpractice, such as the detection of coercive citation manipulation in the peer review process, and how editors should deal with accusations of plagiarism and data falsification by authors. Consequently, we have agreed upon a comprehensive process for article corrections and retractions for our journals, where before these were not clearly foregrounded in our policy information. OLH has referred to and implemented the Committee on Publication Ethics guidance when developing our publisher level policy, and we are fully expecting further publisher level policy to be added in coming months, with debates surrounding the use of AI tools in academic publishing already forming the basis of our upcoming team policy discussions. Most recently, our adherence to COPE's principles of transparency and best practice in scholarly publishing, published in September 2022, have led us to a full-scale revision of journal-level policies and other important journal information, such as editorial oversight, journal governance structures, and use of any advertising and direct marketing by journals. While this update process is still ongoing across our 28 journals, it has highlighted just how much of a dynamic process this is between our journal editors and the OLH editorial team. It has stimulated our journal editors to think ahead about their future editorship and sustainability, to make their editorial structures more transparent, and to define the processes they follow in the scholarly publishing workflow, such as peer review practices. So as for our own flagship Open Library of Humanities journal, we strive to lead by example. Over the last few months, our OLHJ policy information has been entirely revised and fleshed out, not only to include COPE's guidance for transparency and best practice, but to include far more information about how we oversee and safeguard against malpractice in our guest-edited special collections. Again, this is following best practice guidance for guest-edited collections very recently released by COPE, I think in July. They've just updated those. Part of ensuring that OLHJ's guest editors are aware of the policies and processes the journal is bound by has been supplemented by a far more robust onboarding process for new special collection guest editors, with a comprehensive handbook and clear links to online information such as Janeway tutorials. So while we have matured our own publisher and journal policies and processes, Janeway has also advanced certain features that have been extremely helpful for the day-to-day activities as a publisher of nearly 30 journals, including our flagship OLHJ. One such feature is the revamped interface for peer review reports, where before it was not always intuitive to know which parts of the peer review report could be accessed by authors. Toggle switches for different parts of the peer review report more clearly denote whether report text or uploaded review files will be shown to an author. Thank you, Joe, as well, for working really hard on that. We do really appreciate that. Other features of Janeway that have significantly improved our publishing workflow have been the introduction of logs for article actions, which allow editors to clearly see the most up-to-date actions that have been performed on an article in Janeway's workflow, and emails that can be sent directly to authors and others from within Janeway, including the very helpful ability to easily remind peer reviewers to complete a review with a reminder email. Janeway's typesetting workflow has dramatically improved, moving from production proofing stages to one combined logical system for issuing typesetting tasks and corrections to XML and PDF galleys. And to assist with potential issues of plagiarism, integrated authenticate functionality can help editors to quickly assess the integrity of a submission. So taken together, our own OLH improvements to policy and processes, along with Janeway's continuing robust improvements and additional features, serve to demonstrate OLH's commitment to the best possible open access publishing experience for everyone, for editors, reviewers, authors, typesetters, and for readers. Thank you very much for listening. I'll hand back to Rose.
Right, thank you very much. So I'd now like to introduce Dr. Ernesto Priego for the next talk, who's joining us online. Ernesto, do we have you? Could you unmute and give us a wave? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, Rose.
Brilliant. Excellent. So Ernesto is a senior lecturer at the Department of Computer Science at City University of London. As a researcher based at the Centre for Human-Computer Interaction Design, he explores the role of comics as narrative and conceptual and speculative design tools. He's researched comics since the early 1990s and co-founded the Comics Grid Journal of Comic Scholarship in 2010, a journal which he's co-edited since January 2011. So over to you, Ernesto.
Okay, so do you see the slides? Yes, I think
yes.
so. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, yes, thank you so much, Rose. It's nice to see you again. And it's been lovely to follow everything that Janeway and the OLH have been doing. Congratulations for this event. It's very exciting. Okay, so yeah, it's moving. All right, so just a bit of a historical presentation here. It will be a bit haphazard, as you can see. It's already been because it is really the result of thinking that has been evolving over time and space, literally. So please bear with me. We have this on this slide. We have some screenshots from what at the time was quite influential for me, particularly the work that Kathleen Fitzpatrick had been publishing in 2009, and then more formally in 2011. On publishing and peer review and opening peer review and the work they did in Media Commons Press to allow annotations of manuscripts online, in which one could provide almost real-time feedback, seemed, well, essentially peer review was really important for me personally, and it is what inspired the creation first of a group, basically the Comics Grid. I'm talking about today about the journal that's called the Comics Grid, Journal of Comic Scholarship. At the time in 2010, I started it as what I call the International London Comics Grid meetup. The idea was to find people that were like-minded and were interested in challenging the way that comic studies in particular was embracing scholarly publishing. I was particularly upset by the dominance of paywalls, and I was really keen on developing a platform, a new journal from scratch. So once upon a time, in what now seems like a galaxy far, far away, after working together, finding like-minded people that I hadn't met in person, at the time I was doing a PhD at the UCL, and I was the only one working in comics at the time in that group of 3 or 4 of us who were there. So I had to reach out to people in other institutions and countries, and following work done in comics conferences, specifically in 2010. Well, the first article was published on the 31st of January 2011. You can see a screenshot of the archived version on the web archive. It was, I call this now the naive era of the journal, in which for 4 years we published ferociously. We used WordPress. We adapted basically WordPress, or I adapted WordPress to work as a journal, and we did open peer review via, believe it or not, Google Docs. This cost a lot of stress and I would even say suffering, even though there was a lot of excitement around it. And it did cause changes in the leadership of the journal, because we were also all going through career changes. Everyone was doing PhD, so essentially we were all PhD students that were putting this project together. We were not considered to be an actual journal because it was essentially a blog that wanted to be a journal. We called ourselves at the time a peer-reviewed blog. So what we did by 2014 as well, and this was also led by my obsession with demonstrating that scholarly publishing was something that could be done by scholars, particularly if those scholars were studying media or publishing or communications, and that the whole idea of publishing books was completely mystified and idealized. We did a compilation of the best, most solid articles, I would say, that we had published in the blog, because the blog, the journal in the blog used to also publish other types of articles that were reviews from conferences or from talks, some short interviews, etc. So in this compilation, we only published those that were more akin traditional journal, research journal articles, and it was published as if published is the right term, as an ebook by depositing it in a repository, in an open access repository. It was also, it was in comparison to what can be done now. It was essentially an amateur, naive attempt at academic self-publishing. However, it did, force us to develop collaborative skills, and also to practice those technical skills that were required to publish something like a scholarly edition of collected articles. So this can still be downloaded. Thanks to our, again, I would say, very focused and dedicated networking and promotion, and my own interest in finding, in which way we could turn the project into something that was more sustainable. We were approached by Brian Hall from Ubiquity Press. It is at Ubiquity that I met Andy and Mauro as well. The team was super supportive of the project. They basically loved the idea. We migrated the 1 year of the articles, so in the last year of the WordPress era, because they were the ones that were already beginning to be more akin to what we see published in journals, in peer-reviewed journals now, and forced us to start developing guidelines and best practices that, in the spirit of the naive era, as I call it, was all done collaboratively, openly, through mostly Google Docs, and basing ourselves in existing policies and guidelines that were available elsewhere, for example, in Crossref or the Committee of Publishing Ethics, etc. So I mean, Ubiquity did have, like the OLH, a whole set of policies that were expecting their journals to observe, but at the same time there was quite a lot of freedom that we got to really think about how we could make those policies specific to our field. For example, in our case, being comics, what we needed were policies that took into consideration the fact that we were studying comic books of all things, and that therefore we needed to be able to show images and the implications that had for copyright and licensing, etc. Also in terms of archiving, for example. In that era, the backend was essentially OJS, but we were lucky that, you know, with the team at Ubiquity Press at the time, we were able to have, you know, an appearance that was slightly more dynamic, a little bit more visually appealing, and in line to what comic books at least look like. But they also, you know, allow things like comments that was something that our blog used to do, and this is something that over time we have lost. And this this screenshot must have been from around 2015. It would be very interesting to see, you know, how those metrics have changed by now. The one that we have in the screenshot here of only 5 downloads so far. It was probably just after the article. No, well, if the screenshot says that the comments are from 4 months ago, it means that probably in 4 months we had only 5 downloads. So, you know, it was a question of a minority, you know, small field in which we were also doing something that was quite new for that field, which meant combining a little bit of the blog and social media culture of user-generated content, of being able to publish quickly and to be able to respond to content quickly with standardized processes. So we were, you know, this is 2015. It's been 4 years, and we continue thinking that it was essential that as scholars we were reaching out to the community, to a community that was interested in doing things slightly differently, or that were aware that there were problems with scholarly publishing and with the sector with the field as we had experienced it, to think about you know, how to modernize the way we did things. But this also meant doing it in a way that was not basically, you know, falling into confirmation bias or expecting people to do the work that we thought had to be done, but really going to the bottom end of just wanting to know from the beginning what was that people wanted and needed. And this sometimes meant discovering that there was a need for things that were traditional rather than you know, decidedly innovative. So the journey continues, and by 2016 we migrate to the Open Library of Humanities. We signed a contract with them, I think, in late 2015. With you guys, it's been amazing since then. We are still with the Open Library of Humanities, and this has meant, you know, changes not only in the appearance of the journal, or also in the backend when Janeway was introduced, but that has not been only a technical change, but it has been a change in terms of how we have done things, you know, in terms of what are the guidelines that we have been following and the policies that we have been observing. But it has also meant a change in how the team does the journal and what kind of articles are published and how often and when, etc. So again, you know, I just want to show you how, you know, there's, if you were able to see my Google Drive, my folder for the comics grid since 2011, there is dozens and dozens of open documents where every single idea and every policy and every process has been brainstormed and discussed in order to come up with things that can work for everyone. So this is an example from 2017. We have that, you know, ideas, for example, for the customizing the email responses. This particular example was rejected, but it was about being able to say, we're sorry, it takes ages. But if you really compare to what research says how long it takes to publish in other journals, we are not doing that bad. So, you know, with openness, what came was a closer, perhaps faster relationship with authors, but this also created sometimes friction about expectations. So gradually what we were learning is that we really needed more clarity and structure in terms of and transparency of what we were expecting and what we were as editors and what authors could expect and what we were able to provide and when, because in the past it may have been too vague and this caused friction. For example, people, because they saw that we were publishing articles in an ongoing basis, not waiting for a whole issue to be ready, but publishing them as they became available, and as long as the editorial process, the review process was completed, then from the perspective of other authors, we were always publishing content, and for most of them, their experience was very swift, was very efficient, and they were like, "Wow, this is fantastic because you guys are publishing quite quickly." So the word spread out, and then when we were not able to meet that demand, we're starting to have problems. So then there's also been an evolution to try not to be so apologetic and to instead just try to communicate as more clearly as possible what it is that we are expecting and we can provide to authors. So obviously the audit that started in 2021, led by Simon and Catherine, was incredibly useful, and it meant a lot of work, and it led again to changes in the appearance of the journal, but in terms of how we've been operating as well. So this is an example of when we were doing the, even before we were contacted by Simon and Catherine about the audit to ensure that we were following the peer review and that our publication cycle was clear. We were already correcting everything. So as you can see from here, it's been a constant work of updating guidelines. What was also clear was that the expectation to do things professionally, by professionally I mean traditionally in terms of what is expected of professional peer-reviewed scholarly publishing, was the contradiction with the fact that we were doing it in our own time, that we are academics that do not get paid to do this directly, and that rarely get time unless we make it so we don't get time for it. So following the pandemic, things changed dramatically in terms of people's awareness of how much time we were spending in front of screens, etc. So following my suggestion, the editorial team, who had also been evolving in terms of membership, accepted to go into a process of internal professional coaching, following a systems intelligence methodology, defining an editorial team alliance, trying to discover how we wanted to work together, what it is that people were expecting to get from the experiences, since they were not going to get paid to do it. Then, why were they there? Why were we there? How would we solve problems? How would we solve disagreements? Also, again, because that tension between the innovation that we wanted to represent and embody, like we wanted to change things, like, for example, the times it gets to get something published, and the opacity of peer-reviewed that we can often come across, the symbolic violence and toxicity of double-blind peer review. Sometimes it allows it. The repetition of or the over-representation of certain names or backgrounds in research, that sometimes those blind processes can protect or can enhance. So there is a tension there that has a human cost, a social cost, a psychological cost, and then in the end it's all economic too. So we have tried to reflect on that in editorials, which is also contradictory because of what you cannot see, for example, of how in this particular editorial we were trying to reflect on that experience, but at the same time there were tensions behind it because of the conditions of production and conditions of existence that all of the members were going through. So yeah, how to interrogate working conditions within working conditions that are specific. So we have standardized the peer review process. We went from, and we've been historically, I haven't presented it very well to you, but we started following a process that was based on a blog. So people originally submitted to us by getting an account into essentially the blog and submitting it there, and then we would move the submission to Google Docs, and then we would offer peer review that was essentially open. Then we tried to do a mixture of the process when we went to Ubiquity and OLH, and eventually went back to double-blind. Or we went to double-blind peer review. So what that has meant is that it has implied a change in the publication cycle. Instead of publishing at least an article per month, instead of having a quick turnover. For example, this year we have not published a single article, and this is the first time in 12 years that the Comics Grid has not published a single article by September. Well, by January. So the moment you make things more more professional, I would say, then the cost is the time it gets to do it, as long as when you don't have the required conditions to keep that same timing. So there is an issue there when you do know that the field is small. I'm probably doing horrible for timing, right, Rose?
I was just about to say, I think we're pretty much at time, if that's all
okay. Right. Yes, so I'm concluding basically. Thank you for your patience. Indeed, there is a tension in peer review. There is a tension in open access publishing between innovation and the need to participate in the scholarly cultures that currently exist. So transformation is taking time, and there is a need for that balance. The other one is the tension in double-blind peer review between the fact that the academic fields are social fields, and that when they are small, people do know each other, and the pretension that it is the expectation that it is possible to do things in an anonymous manner. I can share the slides later, but I think we have seen very positive changes that Janeway and the OLH have been able to do, help us to implement, but there are still questions that remain about what would be the best way of doing it. Hopefully there will be an issue this year by December. But if we want wider participation, if we want more diversity in the peer review and in the editorial teams, if we want to be stricter and avoid problems, then that takes time. So yeah, I think this is still an issue. So going back to the beginning, thank you so much for your patience, and I hope it made any sense. I'd love to answer any questions. Thank you, Rose.
That was great. Thank you, Ernesto. So our final speaker of the day is Catherine Grant, who's joining us online as well. Catherine is Honorary Professor at Aarhus University, Denmark, and Senior Research Fellow at the University of Reading in the UK. She was elected a member of the Film, Media and Visual Studies section of Academia Europaea in 2020, and she carries out her film and moving image studies research mostly in the form of remix-based video essays. She also runs the Film Studies for Free social media platforms and is a founding co-editor of the award-winning peer-reviewed journal In Transition, Journal of Videographic Film and Moving Image Studies. Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you so much, Rose and Simon and everyone at OLH. I've really enjoyed the last 2 days, so thanks to everyone at Janeway as well. I think Caroline made the announcement yesterday that the journal that I co-edit at the moment is migrating to the OLH next year. And so we're in that process of, in a way, going through this sort of iterative and discursive context that Ernesto has just outlined, that they went through several times at Comics Grid. This is the second time we'll have gone through it. We have been at our existing platform, which I'll talk about a little bit, for just over 10 years now, and we'll be celebrating 10 years of publishing in the spring next year. So I'm going to talk about open peer review at In Transition, and I'm going to share my screen. Hang on a sec, so I won't be able to. Okay, let me just, as a window. Okay, it's not giving me the chance to share Chrome, so I'm gonna actually share my screen. Sorry for the mise en abîme there. The first thing you should be seeing is the Discord server. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I just posted all of the links that I'm going to use in my my tour of our open peer review, kind of background, inspirations, and a couple of examples. So you can see everything there. Our journal is here. It's the first link that you've got in that list. As you can see, we are currently embedded or published by Media Commons. Ernesto described Media Commons Press as one of his inspirations. It was certainly one of mine. I've been messing around with open access publishing since about 2006, and messing around with a particular scholarly form that I'm going to be talking about, videographic film and moving image studies, or video essays as they're often called, since about 2009. And 2006 itself is an important date for video essays. They began to become a thing around then, after the founding of YouTube and Vimeo, the two sharing platforms for videos. Once those platforms went online, scholars and critics started sharing their video works, studies, for example, of films and moving image artifacts that were made up of excerpts from the films and moving image artifacts themselves. So we're in a kind of broad field. I would roughly describe it as a remix. Some of the forms would be very recognizable to you as essayistic. They would be very discursive, argumentative, perhaps with a talking head, maybe with a voiceover, articulating an argument, giving examples. But it's a spectrum that on the other end is very poetic and experimental, and maybe doesn't feel like an essay at all. So my interest in this field began, I think, seriously when I started making them in 2009, and I was very interested in the potential of this as a scholarly artifact, a scholarly area of practice, but I really naturally gravitated towards the more poetic end. And so I found myself really challenged as a scholar, as a lot of other of my colleagues and friends were as well, because in a way the norms of scholarly peer reviewing were not going to lend themselves very easily to that sort of more poetic end. So how to set up publishing contexts that would allow us not to codify these forms too early and start ruling out things that might be extremely promising, simply to gravitate towards the kind of comfort zone of obvious scholarly content. And I guess a lot of that kind of became a kind of fruitful area, not just one of stress, suffering and excitement, as Ernesto memorably called it, around the discussions that led to the setting up of In Transition. In Transition was founded by Christian Keithley and by Jason Mittal, Drew Morton and myself in about 2014, and well, we started discussions in 2013. And Jason Mittal, like Kathleen Fitzpatrick, was one of the co-directors of Media Commons, and Jason was really super interested in open peer review, and his interest matched my own. I had very acute commitment to this, and I just wanted to point out that Jason has already at length discussed the peer review processes at In Transition and its founding in a way that means I don't have to go into too much detail this afternoon. So this is the second link you have, which is to a dossier, a PDF dossier, originally published in a 2017 issue of Cinema Journal, which looked at videographic criticism. from a number of different perspectives. I have a piece there on making. Jason was interested in examining our processes around peer reviewing. So I'm not going to replicate a lot of what he says. Instead, I'm going to talk a little bit more personally, because Jason was certainly involved in the principle of open peer reviewing and how it became applied to in transition. I was, as an editor, and particularly as the most frequent production editor of issues, the one who's responsible for how things look at the journal in a finished form, was responsible for a kind of different end of the process, one that has very specific dynamics. I'm going to try and articulate those for you. Now, in our About page, we acknowledge the influence of Screenworks, screenworks.org.uk, which is a British-based but international peer-reviewed online publication of practice research in screen media. It had come out of a print publication, the Journal of Media Practice, and initially had been a DVD insert in that journal and then gravitated online. And when it went online, it innovated in a large number of ways, I think a lot of which were led by the then editor, John Dovey, but also the editor, who's still the chief editor, Charlotte Crofts, in practices of peer review. And so we effectively stole, but we acknowledged it, so it was an open theft, the system at Screenworks with one difference. So let's just look at an article, any old article here, a recent one. Each of the entries at Screenworks begins with a screenwork at the top, often a film, but not always, sometimes different forms of screenworks, a research statement by the maker of the piece with a very, very kind of rigorous and sort of formulaic, in a good way, approach to the research process. And then right at the bottom of the page, there are always two peer reviews, both anonymous, which are quite informative, and again formulaic, they are form-based, about the whole process of the review. So these are open peer reviews in a somewhat different sense from Ernesto and what he was trying to account for. We're not getting the kind of back end of the review. We're getting a little bit of it at Screenworks, but nonetheless, it's more that these are sort of final peer reviews that are published alongside the work, and they are published anonymously. Another very important influence, though, we didn't acknowledge particularly in transition, but which certainly very much impacted on my practice, and I've written about this a lot, is the USC, University of Southern California, experimental publication Vectors. Vectors was one of the first publications publishing academic video essays, and including very experimental ones. And here's a piece that they published by Eric Faden, who, as you'll see, publishes often in transition as well. So one of his very early works here. Unfortunately, the video is no longer online. The technology isn't up to it anymore. But Eric's project is online in a kind of like a written sense, and also online. Let me just expand the print size here. Is an open peer review. And I think it is this specific piece of work, in fact, that's been very, very influential on a lot of what I do, and in particular the work of Eric and Vicky Callahan, the reviewer here. Now, Vicky was assigned to Eric along with a programmer to produce his work. So it was a kind of iterative process between these three parties, the video maker, a programmer, and an external peer reviewer, working rather like Ernesto's process, I think. But yet again, the final peer review we see is one that's produced for publication. It sort of misses out a lot of the earlier stages. So I want to turn to In Transition now. We publish a lot of videos. We've pretty much published 4 issues every year since 2014. The first few years mixed a lot of curated issues with peer-reviewed issues. But we needed a quite streamlined system, and this is where we're at with our peer reviewer instructions and a form right at the moment. This is our latest version of this form. And I'm just going to quickly run through it so you can see some of the key things. The very first one, which didn't used to be the case, is allowing the peer reviewer to say whether during the review process they wish to remain anonymous or not. When we started, we actually were very pro non-anonymous open peer reviewing, and so the forms did not give the reviewers the chance to be anonymous at any stage. We still have a system that all open peer reviews appearing at our website have to carry the name of the reviewer, but during the process we allow a reviewer to remain anonymous. Now, in fact, mostly they choose not to remain anonymous. And you can imagine that that basic choice will dictate a lot how they are going to articulate their response to the work. We have a tick box sort of form here about whether the work is worthy of publication. If it's gone out to peer reviewers, the desk review process of our co-editors has generally arrived at the conclusion that the work is worthy of peer review and will not waste a peer reviewer's time. But this system takes the reviewer through to the next page, which looks at if revisions are necessary, could you list some? And this piece of wording here is very important for us now. Please bear in mind that not all potential revisions may be feasible, and they may also conflict with what the other reviewers and the editors may suggest. The editors will liaise with reviewers and submitters to agree upon a reasonable and feasible set. I'm not sure I understand. Siri's just chipping in there. A reasonable and feasible set of revisions if these are required. Now, this wording covers over a kind of minefield about videographic work. When we edit written work, we have the file, we have the Word document. Editors can get their hands on it, they can make changes, obviously usually with the agreement of authors. With video editing, we don't have the file at any stage. So it's very much a process of negotiation in a much more direct way than I think with written work. And so reviewers need to be aware of this. We usually appoint reviewers from perhaps our editorial board. We have a large editorial board and a team of regular reviewers. We also have a team of associate editors. And we try to have one subject specialist teamed with somebody else who is hopefully also a subject specialist, but somebody who's been making video essays and so knows the range of possibilities. Once the reviewer is happy and thinks that the review is worthy of publication, they write a publication statement. It's usually a very draft document until the final stages. And then if they're not in favour of publication, share any other comments. So it's kind of, in a way, quite standardised. But let's look at some of the consequences of this before I conclude. I wanted just to show two pieces of work very quickly, or not play them, unfortunately, you'll have to play them in your own time. But just to show you two examples of how this plays out in the final issues of In Transition with work that has been unanimously agreed for publication by reviewers and editors. So here we have a piece by Caroline Rumley, and you can see here it's 1 minute and 54 seconds. Now, if I were to play it to you, you would find it just kind of off the cuff, rather difficult to get a grasp of, I think. It's extremely experimental. It's very much remix, not so much an obvious essay. But what we did was we loved it, the editors all loved it, felt it was definitely worthy of being sent out. We liked the statement that the writer wrote, although it's quite academic, as you can see, very much about Laura Mulvey and so on. And we appointed two peer reviewers, but both ones we thought were both leaders in their field, but also ones who would be basically sympathetic to the work, because there is no point in appointing reviewers who are not going to be at the right end of the spectrum or working in a sort of similar way, because they will automatically not understand it or like it. But nonetheless, they still have to make a case for publishing it. And so that's what both authors did. I'll leave you to read these in your own time, but you can see that what happens here is alongside the video, alongside the author's statement, there's a kind of verbal coactivation of this work as scholarship. It's one that also allows for disagreements. Rob Stone loved the first draft of the video, but the other reviewer recommended a change or two. The change was implemented. Rob still felt it was worth publication. He really liked it, but he had really loved the first version. And so he wanted to include his original statement plus a postscript about the revised version of the work. And so this is really what open peer review is. Quite a lot is let to hang out in this process. I just want to conclude with one further example. A video essay by Eric Faden, who's at a different end of his career to Caroline Rumley, very much a senior scholar, been making practice research for a long time. Here is an extremely long, for us, one of our longest video essays, 25 minutes long. It's very much an essay. It's like a documentary with an argument. Very few people would find it obviously insufficiently scholarly. Most people would agree off the top of their heads that it was obviously worthy of publication. Eric didn't want to provide a supporting statement, which is fine by us. We simply require an abstract. But we were able to appoint Laura Mulvey. I mean, who wouldn't want to be peer reviewed by Laura Mulvey, probably the most famous person in screen studies in the world, who absolutely loved this work, which discusses her own work, wrote a beautiful essay about it, and a second review by another very, very wonderful scholar, Malcolm Turvey, who's very much producing work in the line of film studies that Eric Faden is. So I've kind of hurtled through a few things. If I can conclude to say that this system takes a huge amount of labour, the kind of nursing of all of the participants together at the final stages to provide statements that everybody is happy with and that work together and that work for us as a journal. It requires a lot more work than simply copy editing and proofreading. It's a very, very active process indeed. And so what we're really presenting in Transition is scholarship, including this pretty new form of audiovisual scholarship, as co-authored in some deep sense, or at least co-activated as scholarship in some deep sense. And I'm going to end with one Star Trek Janeway reference, which is that it's a particularly interesting kind of critical constellation that is evolving in the pages of our journal. Thank you.
Thank you very much.